Hi everybody, welcome to Organisational Behaviour, Buzzy 1029. This is our second part of our lecture on motivation. In the first lecture recording, we considered content theories of motivation. And we're now going to move on to process theories and instrumental theories of motivation. As with the previous recording, the core reading to support these videos is Huczynski and Buchanan chapter 8 in the 6th edition and chapter 9 in the 9th edition. So let's move on to process theories of motivation. Process theories of motivation differ from content theories primarily in their focus not on the things that motivate people, the literal objects that motivate people, but rather on thinking about motivation as something that emerges from a process or a way of thinking. So let's illustrate that. Probably, the easiest way to illustrate that is if I explain some examples of process theories. One example is what's known as expectancy theory. Expectancy theory says people aren't motivated by, they may well be motivated by some kind of instinctual drives, as in the case of Sigmund Freud, or some higher meaning in the case of Frankl, or by their theory Y attitudes in the case of McGregor. But expectancy theory says, irrelevant of all of those sort of things which might push people to be motivated, unless they actually expect that what they do can contribute to the things that they want, they're not going to do anything. What does this mean? It means you might be really, really motivated to get great marks on your assignment. But if you don't really believe that watching this video and doing the core reading is going to translate into those marks, you're not going to be motivated to do them. So although you might want the thing, you're not going to be motivated to engage in the task. Expectancy theory then sort of pictures individuals as engaging in a lot of what we would call mental accounting. It pictures us as sort of calculating machines. We're constantly trying to figure out how much motivational force we should devote to an activity. And we do that by calculating the perceived value of the potential outcomes to us, the expectancy that our efforts will lead to performance, and the expectancy that our performance will lead to the outcome. And if there's any weakness here, if there's any flaws in this chain of thinking, people won't be motivated to do something. In fact, mathematically, you multiply each of these elements, which means if any one of them is 0, the net result is 0. So let's just give you an example. Let's just say you greatly value getting a first in your undergraduate degree. And you expect that if you put effort in, so you do all the reading, you come to all the classes, that will lead to performance. But you don't believe your performance will be rewarded if you assume that, we've already made our minds up about who's going to get first and who's not. Or if you thought that we only had a certain number of firsts that we could give out, making it unlikely that you were going to get one, well then you would have a low level of instrumentality. You would assume that your performance wouldn't necessarily lead to the outcome that you want, and this would mean you wouldn't be motivated. Equally, you might really want to get a first, but believe that actually putting in the effort to do all of the readings isn't going to lead to performance. It's not going to mean that you're performing any better on the module than somebody that just kind of blags it at the last minute. So you'd have a low level of expectancy. This again would lead to a low motivational force. Similarly, you could just not really want to get a first, in which case you might believe the reason you don't want to get a first is because, hey, you're first year students, it doesn't count towards your degree, the value of having a first to you is very low. So again, according to expectancy theory, irrelevant of what might be driving you to be motivated, irrelevant of the things you might want to achieve, if you don't expect the value of those outcomes to have meaning for you, if you don't expect that effort will lead to performance or that performance will lead to the outcome you want, you won't be motivated. So hopefully you can see how this is much more of a way of thinking about motivation as a process, as a calculation, as a set of what would you call it, tasks almost that you go through in your mind to calculate whether or not you'll be motivated, than content theories, which literally just say people are motivated by X, people are motivated by Y, people are motivated to do this. This now says, and it's irrelevant of what the things that people are motivated by, there's a process that they go through that creates their motivation. So you have expectancy theory as a good example of a process theory. Another good example of a process theory is called equity theory. Equity theory is neatly related to expectancy theory, but it focuses not just on our expectations of our own performance, but also on the equity or the justice that we feel, the fairness that we feel in comparison to others. An example of this is the work of Adams. Adams would say, you are motivated when you think your action is going to create a reward or an outcome that is going to be of equal or more value than somebody else's effort and their outcome. What does that mean? Well, it means if you might truly believe that if you read all the textbooks and come to all the classes and engage in all the discussions, and that you could get a good mark. But you also believe that it's possible to not do those things and get a good mark. Well, you would think it was unfair for you to put in all the effort to have to get a good mark. So you would not be motivated to do that, and you just try to get the good mark without putting in all the effort. So Adams's ideas is much more based on people's perception of fairness. And if somebody doesn't believe something is going to be fair, that their effort and relative to their reward is too high, they won't be motivated to act because I think it's unfair. I think they're getting unequitable treatment. Once somebody feels that something is fair, then they're going to be motivated to act. So this is Adams's idea. It focuses on perceptions leading to motivation, motivation leading to action, and then action potentially reinforcing those perceptions. So in our example of the student that's decided it's not worthwhile putting any effort, that expectation, Adam says, has to come from somewhere. And it comes from people's observations, their experience, the things that they do, and the results that they get. Porter and Lawler drawed on these process theories to develop a model of workplace motivation, which tells us that satisfaction or motivation affects the amount of effort that somebody's going to put in. The amount of effort somebody puts in affects their performance, and their performance affects their level of satisfaction. So you get this circle or this cycle or this loop taking place. So you start with somebody's effort, and this might be based on equity theory, it might be based on expectancy theory, but essentially it's how much do you want the reward, how much do you believe that your performance is going to affect whether or not you get the reward. If you believe those things are both high, you'll put in a lot of effort. But your effort's not on its own going to lead to job performance. It's going to depend on your traits and your abilities, your perceptions of the role, of things you can do, the division of labour in your organisation, and so on and so forth. So that's going to lead to your level of performance, which in turn is going to lead to the intrinsic rewards that you get, and the extrinsic rewards is going to lead to the level of pay that you get. It's going to lead to the psychological rewards that you get from your work. And that then creates your level of satisfaction, which feeds back into the perceived value of rewards, into the effort that you put in. So you start to get this cycle. So this is based on the assumption that rewards can cause satisfaction, and that sometimes performance produces the rewards. So it starts to expand expectancy theory and other process theories, combining them together really into what I think is quite an accurate description if you think of your own motivation to engage in things. So these are examples of process theories. Hopefully you can see a big difference here if you just conceptualize this model set against, for example, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is all focused on the things that people want to get, the content of our motivation. Process theories are much more focused on the processes of thinking or becoming motivated. So it doesn't matter whether this is your, performance when it comes to achieving biological safety or knowledge or aesthetics, to use some of Maslow's ideas. This is abstracted of the content and focusing on the process. Okay, so that's the second learning objective, hopefully ticked off. Let's move on to the final one, thinking about instrumental theories. Instrumental theories of motivation have an implicit process perspective in them and an implicit content perspective in them, but are slightly different. They focus on the things people want to get. So not so much on the things that are pushing people, the things that are pushing them to achieve something, but actually the achievement, the rewards that they can get. And this is largely based on the work of a psychologist called B.F. Skinner, who, if you've ever had a pet, you'll probably be aware of. Skinner came up with the idea of conditioning. The idea that you give somebody something that they want, a reward, a perk, whether that's, in the case of a pigeon, a nice little bit of food, or in the case of a worker, a bigger office, or, their own parking space, or a company credit card, or some kind of reward, even pay, when they do what you want them to do. And you withhold that perk when people aren't doing the things that you want to do. And Skinner set out a very set method for conditioning people through the use of rewards. A method which incidentally has now been widely adopted in social media companies in the design of their algorithms, but has also been used at the heart of a lot of management and organisation thinking. When we get to something like a performance appraisal, where you would sit down with your manager and they would evaluate what you had done and then attribute a reward to you. This is a form of conditioning. So it is conditioning people's behaviour to the ends that the organisation wants by giving them something that they would like. If you think back to our ideas of organisational goals, conditioning tends to be focused on what we would call private goals. So it would say, the organisation will give you something towards your private goal, maybe a pay rise or a promotion, based on the work that you've done trying to achieve the organisation's goal. And a lot of the instrumental theories of motivation in organisations, unlike Skinner's work, focus on goals, on giving people goals to achieve and then rewards linked to the achievement of those goals. And this has led to what's known as goal-setting theory. And the idea here is if you give somebody a goal, it will motivate them to achieve that goal, especially when you link it to some kind of a reward. However, it was also found that it's not just the reward, the extrinsic reward, the pay, the perks. There are certain factors of goals which influence whether people will be motivated by them. Locke, for example, found that, he didn't write in 1875, that's a bit of a typo, found that if the goal is not difficult enough, if it's too easy to achieve, it won't lead to high performance. So you can offer goals which are stretch targets, that even if people don't achieve them, they'll often do more trying to achieve something than if you'd set a lower, more realistic goal. Locke found that the goal has to be specific. That is, you can't just say, do a better job. You actually have to say specifically, teach your lecture to this many students and get this score on your student evaluation, for me, for example. Or for you, it's not just study more, it would be read this book and it will lead you to get a higher mark. This is goal specificity. Locke also found that when people involved in the goal are able to participate in setting the goal for themselves, they have more commitment to it, more involvement in it, and therefore are more likely to buy into, to use management language, to buy into the goal, and that will lead to performance. Another factor Locke found is that managers or leaders need to get acceptance. So it's not just enough to consult your organisational members. You've actually got to make sure that they understand and that they understand why the goal is important. So it's not simply about participating in the goal setting, but making sure they accept the goal that is actually set. And then finally, they have to have some feedback. They have to have some knowledge of the results so that they know, from an expectancy theory perspective, that their effort led to higher performance, which may hopefully lead then to higher rewards. So goal setting theory and conditioning are examples of what we would call instrumental theories. Instrumental because they assume that people in organisations will behave instrumentally. They will be doing something to achieve an end. There'll be a means end. So they'll see the activity as a means towards getting some goal or some end. All of these ideas, so that leads us hopefully then to a brief explanation of instrumental theories of motivation. All of this then points to a really important practical concern for people in organisations, which is designing their organisations and the tasks and jobs in those organisations, the roles in those organisations, so that they will motivate people. This might involve offering the correct extrinsic rewards in the case of Skinner's conditioning. It might involve setting the right goals in the case of Locke. It might involve ensuring that people feel there's a sense of purpose to their activities in the sense of content theories. It might involve guaranteeing people that their efforts and performance will lead to rewards in the case of process theories. All these factors then help us, all these different theories help us to understand how to better organise, how to better design organisations to motivate people, not just pay them more, but actually to gain their commitment to their organisations and their roles in different ways. A really important contribution here is the work of Hertzberg. He developed what's known as two-factor theory. And two-factor theory says there are some things about jobs which motivate people. They lead to high levels of satisfaction. But just because if they don't necessarily exist in a job, it doesn't mean people are unsatisfied. So things like recognition for your work, responsibility, having just actually enjoyable work to do, meaningful work to do, being able to achieve or gain promotions. Hertzberg said these are motivational factors that can lead to high levels of satisfaction. But if you take them away, it doesn't necessarily mean people are dissatisfied. Rather, there's another set of factors, Hertzberg called them hygiene factors or organisational factors, which, if they aren't present, lead to dissatisfaction. But on their own, they don't motivate and lead to high performance. So these include things like pay, supervisory style, security, good working conditions. If you go to work and it's warm and comfortable, that's fine, but it's on its own, that's not going to motivate you to work really hard. But if you go to work and it's unsafe and freezing cold, you will be dissatisfied with your job. So this is Hertzberg's idea. Hertzberg's idea is in particular settings, there are certain types of factors which motivate people, leading to high levels of satisfaction. And in other situations, there are hygiene factors which don't necessarily lead people to be more motivated, but they stop people being dissatisfied. Okay. So Hertzberg's idea was that when we're designing organisations, when we're designing tasks, when we're dividing roles up, we need to think about how we can enrich those roles. So make sure that they have some horizontal loading factors, or what we might call some hygiene factors covered, but also some what Hertzberg calls vertical loading factors or motivating factors at work. So, a good example of this is you can add a vertical loading factor like challenging an employee to do something new or take on new responsibility, and that might enrich their work, make it more motivating. But just asking somebody to do another meaningless task isn't going to motivate them. Hackman and Oldham took this idea further. They said you can think about analysing jobs in terms of their potential to motivate people. And they said there are 5 dimensions which tend to make jobs motivating. That's the variety of skills involved, the identity of the task, whether the task is a complete piece of work or whether you're just doing a small, meaningless piece of work, the significance of the task, that is the effect to which you think it affects the work of other people inside your organisation and beyond, the autonomy of the task, how much independence and discretion do you have over the role. And this is, the opposite of what we discussed in our technology class on de-skilling. And then feedback, the extent to which the performance of information is related back to the individual. You can hopefully already start to see that across this discussion of motivation, there's many key ideas which are shared across different theories. The importance of, for example, autonomy, the importance of having some meaning or significance to one's activities, the activities themselves. These are shared across all different theories of motivation. So Hackman and Oldham developed these ideas to show how different styles of designing tasks can lead to different outcomes. So they said you might, for example, combine tasks, which increases skill variety, and that makes work more meaningful. And more meaningful work tends to produce high motivation and high quality performance, high satisfaction, low turnover, low absenteeism. You can allow people to form natural work groups. And again, if you think back to our technology lecture, where we talked about socio-technical systems and the idea that if you put people into an organisation together, they will form natural groups around their work. When they do this, they have a strong sense of identity, a strong feeling of significance, which means their work is more meaningful to them. And again, that leads to these outcomes. You can encourage people to have relationships with their clients so they can see the impact of their work on other people, both inside and outside the organisation. And this leads to high levels of task significance, which allows people not only to feel meaningfulness in their work, but also experience responsibility for what they're doing. You can engage in vertical loading, right? You can enrich people's work, give them more autonomy, which gives them more responsibility. But giving people autonomy and responsibility often means accountability or knowledge of results. And again, this leads to these outcomes. And feedback gives people feedback, which gives knowledge of results and leads to all of these outcomes. A lot of the theories of motivation were developed in psychology, sort of from the 1920s across to the 1950s and 60s. Since then, a lot of organisational psychologists have tried to understand the relationship between motivation and performance, and a key concept here is the idea of high-performance teams. Researchers have looked at teams that are performing really, really well, groups of people that are working at a really, really high level. And what they've found is that they tend to have many of these concepts, many of these core job dimensions. They tend to be natural working groups with strong client relationships, combined tasks, strong sense of feedback. An example of this would be something like an F1 team, right? They all have to work together. They have a huge sense of responsibility. Even the people that are just screwing in nuts into tyres, they know that if they get that wrong, they can mess up a whole race. They get feedback on their performance. Everything is measured down to, a hundredth of a second. And this leads to really strong, high levels of performance. People are motivated by the design of their work, not simply by the pay, but by having tasks which, as Hackman and Oldham said, have high levels of skill variety, high identity, high significance, high autonomy, and high levels of feedback. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the session. We've, in the previous video, looked at content theories of motivation. We've now thought about process theories and instrumental theories, and we've even thought about how these different theories can play out in the design of different jobs. And now, before I end, guys, I wanted to say, just think about this. One of the powers of motivation, thinking about motivation, is you can find ways to get people to put in effort to an organisation, not by paying them more, but by designing the work so that it's more enjoyable for the members of the organisation, more rewarding for the members of the organisation, more effective and efficient for the organisation, but also costs the organisation less in what it not only has to pay, but the extrinsic rewards that it offers. This is an incredibly powerful thing, and is one of the reasons why motivation is a massively researched and theorised topic in organisation studies, and one that you definitely have to be familiar with as you move forwards in your studies and careers. If you've got any questions, please come to the Q&A sessions, the Ask Me Anything sessions, and leave me a note on the discussion forums. Bye.